Now, we hear, I think nowadays, we hear these terms such as Jew, Hebrew, and Israelite. Now, are there a distinction between those three categories, or are they one and the same, or do they all kind of intersect at certain points? Can you explain to us what is the difference between a Jew, a Hebrew, and an Israelite?
Great question. And by the way, I think it's an important question. I don't know how much you followed my TikTok account, but at one point I tried to explain some of this in, 1 minute TikToks, and I created like a whole graph to try to explain this. But yeah, this is a very important question. And yeah, the three terms can overlap, but they also can be used in different ways. And they also are used in different ways in different communities, and they're used in different ways over historical time. So, so again, it's a somewhat complex picture, but again, it's not unusual. There are many terms in the world that their meanings change over time, and there are competing meanings. In any case, let me try to answer your question. So Hebrew is arguably the oldest term, right? Or it seems to have the oldest potential usage. A Hebrew is a term that comes from uh, the word in Hebrew. Hebrew is also a language, right? But in terms of an identity, in the language Hebrew, it means to pass or to. All right, how do you say that? To okay, like to pass through or to pass over, to sojourn. Okay, and so it applies to Abraham, right? In the stories of Abraham, he is like a Hebrew, and he is somebody who goes from his homeland and he goes into what becomes eventually the land of Israel. Okay, so he is a somebody who is passing or moving across borders and stuff like this, right? So those,
So it's
so
almost like a nomad or something.
right, yeah, right. So it's a
Okay,
certain
okay.
certain group of people who are then identified as this. It's not a generic term for nomad, but it's a term for a particular group of people who have a sort of nomadic practice. That's what it seems to be referring to in the Bible. And so when we talk about Hebrew, we talk about it as a biblical term first, and then it becomes used later on. Okay, so that's Abraham. Now the term Israelite is an English term that is related to the Hebrew word Yisrael or Israel, right? And the first person identified as Israel, as you probably know, is Jacob in the Bible. He's Abraham's grandson. So in the biblical narrative, at least, it's a later term. And it literally means something like, somebody who wrestles with God. And the stories of, Jacob wrestling with the entity that he wrestles with. I don't know if you want to say angel or what you want to say. Um, and and Jacob has 12 sons, and they are the original, I suppose, children of Israel, right? And they are the ones in the biblical narrative that go into Egypt, and then they create a very large population there, and then they leave Egypt. So those people could be called Hebrews because they were descended from Abraham, but they're also becoming the children of Israel. So so there is a large overlap there for most of the biblical narrative, and arguably the terms can be used somewhat interchangeably. Okay, but then it also gets complicated because in the biblical narrative, when they leave Egypt and they eventually get into Canaan, uh, they set up uh, a kingdom called. Um, they set up a kingdom, and the kingdom then splits, and there are two kingdoms, right? There's the northern kingdom and southern kingdom, and the northern kingdom is known as Israel, right? So, so yeah, so you have different uses of the word Israel and arguably different meanings of the word Israelite that I would say is more complicated maybe than the word Hebrew. But if you fast forward centuries, right, you eventually have the word Jew emerging, right? And you asked me about Jew too, or did you just ask me about Hebrew and Israelite?
No, Hebrew, Israelite, and Jew.
Right. So the term Jew uh, comes out of the Hebrew word for Judah. Right. So Judah is, I think, the fourth son of Jacob, and it becomes a tribe. So it's one of the 12 tribes. And when the kingdom splits after King Solomon dies in the Bible, you have the northern kingdom called Israel and the southern kingdom called the kingdom of Judah. Okay, so from the kingdom of Judah, you have people who in English we might call Judahites or Judeans, right? And that kingdom survives. The northern kingdom are sort of the 10 lost tribes. They're destroyed by the Assyrians, according to the biblical and according to historical record too. And the tribe of Judah, some of them get exiled in Babylonia, and then they return. And so that the term that later becomes Jew means somebody who is a Judean, somebody who is it's an adjectival form of the name Judah. Okay. Now, the way, as I was saying earlier in our conversation, the way we use the word Judaism now, the way we use Jew now, that really refers to rabbinic Judaism that emerged after the destruction of the Second Temple. Okay. So before that, I've argued, and based on not my scholarship, but based on other historians, that it's a little anachronistic to use the word Jew to refer to people before that period of time. So you might refer to the people who are the Judeans and the Hebrews and the Israelites. You might refer to them as Judeans up until the time of the destruction of the Second Temple in 70 CE. Now, if you look at things today or the last 100 years, it was not uncommon for Jews to sometimes use the word Hebrew, sometimes use the word Israelite, and they used it interchangeably, right? So you would have organizations like the Hebrew Aid Society, or here in Cincinnati, you have a newspaper called the American Israelite, okay? So that's the American Israelite serves the Jewish community. The Hebrew Aid Society, they serve the Jewish community. So they're using all three terms with considerable overlap. I don't know that they have such great implication, differences in meaning for most of the Jewish world. I don't know that they have that much of a difference. Nowadays, very few Jews that I know really use the term Hebrew or Israelite in popular conversation. How much of that did you catch? Was that useful?
I caught a lot of it. Yeah,
Yeah.
no, it was very, very useful. And basically, I see that there are some people who are in the chat. We got people who identify as Christian, and we got some people who identify as Israel. And I'm glad to see those people a part of the conversation, because I think that you're answering a lot of questions that some of us have kind of been going back and forth about. So yeah, I think you summed that up pretty well. Somebody